Okay, good. And well, welcome everybody. Here we gather at our wonderful Friday afternoon at the Manor, and we're in for a tremendous treat. This is so popular that people have we have a subscription now to the video series we're promoting. I'm suggesting, Marcia, but there are people interested who could not attend. And I pass over our baton over to our wonderful host, Susan Johnson. Over to you, Susan.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. We have our speaker today is Andrew Macdonald, who is going to give us a few guides about the problems with packaging in this modern world and how we might better deal with them. So, Andrew, take it away.
I'm going to spotlight you, Andrew. Okay.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So I will share my screen first off. Bear with me for a moment. Okay, Susan, JJ, can you see my screen okay?
Roger that. Very
Yes.
good.
Roger that.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And then I hope that my slides are, fit within your screen, but I know with different devices, whether you're on an iPad or desktop and so forth, if for whatever reason they don't seem to be fitting in, I believe there should be on somewhere on your Zoom screen, maybe top right, a view options, a set of options, and you can choose fit. I believe it's fit to window. Is that right, JJ?
That's it. That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So just in case, if you find that they're bleeding off the side of your screen, that is an option. Hopefully not, but there you go. So listen, great to be with you this afternoon on a sunny Friday afternoon. I'll just briefly introduce myself. So again, it's Andrew Macdonald. And so most of my work is with an organization called PAC, which is a nonprofit serving the complete packaging value chain. And by that, I mean anything from brand owners like Procter & Gamble, retailers like Loblaw, to packaging manufacturers, the people who make the packages that we all buy, all the way to the back end. Susan, before we got on, mentioned putting things in the recycling bin. So we also work with waste management companies at the back end. And government and other non-governmental organizations are also part of our network. So that's mainly who I work with. I also teach occasionally at Ryerson University in the Graphic Communications Management program. And when I do, it typically is in a sustainable packaging course. And then I also do some of my own consulting work. And again, that's to do with sustainable packaging. So that's the common thread. So for today, I wanted to share with you just some observations really about packaging, which is all around us. I'm sure if you look around the room, you'll probably see some. And ask the question, where's it all coming from and what could or should we do about it? And so I've got about 35 to 40 minutes worth of thoughts. By all means, interrupt me if you'd like to ask a question and you can't wait, that's fine. Or you could put it perhaps in the chat and maybe JJ could interrupt me on your behalf. Or at the end, I think we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the National Geographic cover story was about a year ago. I think it was March 2020, was called The End of Trash. And then the question was, is a world without trash possible? So a pretty, big question, and certainly no easy answer. But in my view, and certainly at PAC, and I don't think I'm alone, we've got to try because it's really piling up around us. And certainly that's what the author of this particular article was taking a stab at. And so in the article, the author provided this image, and no need to focus on all the fine print. Really, I'd like you to zero in on what I've added, the big red parts, and we'll start top left. And that's really just to point out that we as humans demand an extraordinary amount of material every year to the tune of 100 billion tons of minerals, ores, fossil fuels, and biomass. So every year That's what we need to make stuff. And if you look top right, the point is that less than 10% of all that is ever reused or recycled in any way, shape, or form. Which leads us to the bottom left, that the unfortunate story that, you know, roughly 2/3 of all that material is ends up as unrecoverable waste. So we're talking, that includes greenhouse gas emissions, so carbon into the atmosphere, as well as click on managed waste. So in some cases, we actually manage our waste, and that's good. And so it goes to places like landfills. And then there is too an awful lot of mismanaged waste, whether it ends up on our beaches. This happens to be in the Philippines, but it's also close to home, right here in Canada. You may have seen it, but every year there's an event which goes on across the country called the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup. And there have been some, in this case, it was actually a brand audit done. And so, you know, these are the usual suspects. So you see it physically here on the beach, and no surprise that many of the items that you could sort of pick out with your eye there are the ones that show up, you know, your top 10. So these are the top 10 types of packaging that end up on our, you know, shorelines. And then the article also tells us who some of the, you know, the brands, whether it's Tim Hortons or others, that typically end up, you know, so from food wrappers to shopping bags to straws, etc. And so if we just go back for a moment to this image, where it relates to packaging is, you know, we have all these materials, these raw materials that we extract are then turned into things. So wood becomes a cereal box, bauxite becomes aluminum, becomes a soft drink can. And oil, as you may well know, is refined to make many different types of plastics. And a very simple and good example is a single-use grocery bag that at any grocer, you know, those are available. And of course, all kinds of other plastics, from, you know, yogurt containers to barbecue chicken containers, on and on and on and on, to the little, you know, containers that hold our blueberries and our raspberries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll look at some more examples a bit later on in the presentation. So in order to address some of the issues that we see around us, one more point I'd like to make is that in terms of plastic packaging, there's an organization called the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. It's a foundation in the UK, and they put out a lot of really good information about sort of where we're at with plastic packaging. And I wanted to share this one with you just to show you the loss of value economically. We think a lot about the environmental consequences of all this packaging, but there's a real economic loss here. And so what's going on in this little diagram here is, from the right to the left, what this is telling us is that the amount of plastic packaging that is even collected in the first place is very low. So it varies from packaging format to packaging format and from country to country, but just globally, big picture, the takeaway here is that it's low. Here it's 14% is actually ever collected in the first place. And then the second axis here, this one, the top to bottom, tells us that of that which is collected, there's a big value loss. You may have read in the newspaper or seen it on the news that there's a lot of contamination in the recycling bin. So even if it gets collected, there's a lot of value loss because of contamination in the system, to the tune of, you know, 64%. So when you put those two things together, you get this bigger number. It's sort of 95% loss of value once that single-use plastic packaging gets used and then disposed of. So that's high. It's very high, and there's a huge dollar figure associated with it. So what the point of this is to say that if people aren't convinced from an environmental point of view, there's also a very strong dollars and cents argument to say we should be doing things differently and capturing more value from all of those materials that we're extracting, which this image shows us. And so there is an approach that's worth noting that's going to apply to try to deal with some of these issues. You may have heard of it. It's actually described in that End of Trash article, and it's called the circular economy. And it's become a global movement. I would say it's really gained traction and force in the last 5 to 10 years. And again, the engine of the movement is the foundation I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago. It's called the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And a quick backstory on the circular economy is this. It's called the Ellen MacArthur Foundation because Dame Ellen MacArthur, I believe she's now 44. When she was, let's say it was 20 years ago, she sailed around the world by herself, so solo, and I believe set some records for, you know, how quickly she did it. And but while she was doing it, she saw all of the ocean pollution. She passed it every day, and it really deeply moved her. And so when she returned, she set her mind to saying, we've got to do something about it. And that very quickly led to the establishment of this foundation and a global movement to address the issues, really that issue you saw in that earlier diagram, where we take tons of stuff out of the earth, we make a lot of things, and then we dispose it. And so that would be the linear economy. And the idea of a circular economy is to try to keep those materials in circulation and reuse them and keep them circulating at their highest and best value, which makes a lot of sense to a lot of people. Including people we work with at PAC. So many businesses that we work with at PAC have aligned their packaging related sustainability objectives with a more circular approach. And they've made big commitments based on the principles you see here. The principles of designing out waste and pollution, of keeping products and materials in use, and regenerating natural systems. And so just one example of, I mean, I could literally give you hundreds of examples, but just one example, I chose it because it's, you know, a brand that's familiar to, I think, all of us, Coca-Cola. And so this example comes out of Europe, where there are a lot of really particularly positive initiatives going on. And so, you know, this is still in the realm of single-use plastic packaging, but what they're doing is incorporating and making these bottles with 100% recycled plastic. So right now, globally, the percentage of recycled plastic in these sorts of beverage containers is still very low. You know, I think the global average is probably somewhere around 10%. So if, you know, by moving to 100%, it is a significant effort. And it's a good move. It's the right direction. And so that's an example of where industry is doing something about the problem. Here's an example of where governments. So governments globally are starting to move. You see it in Europe, even in the United States, particularly with the recent election. Biden and the Biden administration have I mean, they rejoined the Paris Climate Accord and made some other really positive moves already, early days, but the signs are positive. Here in Canada, this is an image from October of 2020. So Minister Wilkinson announced in association with, I hope you can see it on your screen at the bottom, it says Canada-wide strategy on zero plastic waste. And so as part of that strategy, Minister Wilkinson was announcing what will be coming into play likely this year, regulation on certain single-use plastic packaging items. You can see some of them in the background. They really line up well with what those top 10 in the shoreline cleanup audit. So the Canadian government is doing work here. They do take these issues seriously. And a non-governmental issue, which is really just emerging right now, is that as part of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, there is now what's called a Canada Plastics Pact. This is hot off the press. It just launched on January 27th, so it's very fresh. So that's us up here. But it's the 10th such global plastics pact. And these are serious. Corporations, Loblaw, Canadian Tire, many large corporations we're familiar with have signed up, and it's not just window dressing. I work with these people every day, and they take this very seriously, we're talking about it with them virtually on a day-to-day basis. So it'll take years for it to really get traction, but it's an emerging program that will inevitably we'll see changes as a result of these types of initiatives. So this to me is positive. So that's just some of the I would say the bigger picture, an approach like the circular economy to deal with some of these issues. A few examples of some of the bigger pieces at play here. But let's get into the heart of it. I've got 5, I call them teachables for you today, related to packaging, mostly focused on plastic packaging. And then I'll close with a few ideas at the end as to what I think we can all do, as individuals, day to day, which is, I think, always the challenge. You say, well, what can I do? And so, I think there are some things we can do. So we'll get there. So first teachable, we'll say is I'd like to give you a few points on the source of the plastic pollution out there. So the first point is this, and that is that plastic packaging. This is again from National Geographic, by the way. They have a series. It began coming up 3 years ago. They ran a cover story called Planet or Plastic with a very powerful image of, it's actually an upside down shopping bag that looks like an iceberg when you're not looking at it closely. It's a very powerful image. And that began what is now an ongoing series that addresses the issues we're talking about today. And this image I thought was quite informative. It's really the mountain of plastic, and it shows from sort of 1950 to more or less the present, up to 2015, the exponential growth of plastic, not just plastic packaging, but just plastic in general that's entered into our economy. And the role or the percentage that plastic packaging plays in that. So you can see the total's about, give or take 450 million tons. So it's a big number. And plastic packaging is somewhere around a third of it. So it's a big chunk is what I'm trying to tell you in comparison to all the other plastic that's introduced into the economy. So that's number one. And the second thing is this, which is really important. What is its lifespan? So wherein, building and construction, you might get 35 years out of whatever tubing or whatever product you're dealing with. In packaging, it's less than 6 months. And as you and I know, it's often less than 30 seconds once it gets into the consumer's hand. You open up the cookie pack that has 2 cookies in it, and then that's it. So it has a very short lifespan, high turnover, and hence high demand. And that's a problem. So that's the first point. The second point is more of a geographical point. And this sometimes surprises people a little bit. And that is that when we talk about ocean plastics, this comes up a lot. I'm sure you've seen it in the news. And the fact is, and again, this is information from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So this is credible, solid research that tells us that of the plastic that leaks into the ocean, often from major rivers, a high percentage of it comes from Asia, like this part of the world. There are certainly other sources. We're not immune in Canada and the US and everywhere else, but there is a disproportionate amount of plastic waste flowing into our oceans. And this has a lot to do with infrastructure, like waste management infrastructure, and the lack of it. And so that leakage is just that much higher. And so that is a geographical part of the picture that's, you know, worthwhile to just have in mind. And a third point is just to say, of that plastic packaging that ends up in our oceans, it's kind of worthwhile to know that a big chunk of it, and this is according to Greenpeace. So Greenpeace did some research on this and said that roughly, you know, their research says about 50% of the ocean, that what they call macroplastics. So not the microplastic, but the macroplastics, and you can see some of them here. A lot of it's fishing line and fishing nets and buoys and all these materials. That is a major issue. So if you're looking for a hot spot of plastic pollution in our oceans, one needs to go very quickly to the fishing industry, and there is work being done in that area. So that's, you know, another point to consider. It isn't all, you know, coffee cups and frozen blueberry bags. There are other industries that are contributing to this issue in a disproportionately high manner. So next up, so number two, second teachable for you, and it's this: please don't forget the product. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is that oftentimes as consumers, I think it's natural to focus on the packaging, because if we take food as an example, we eat the food, we consume it, and it's gone, and we're left with the packaging. And so, and especially if it's not obviously recyclable, it's particularly frustrating. Or we see it at the beach. You know, you don't see the coffee, you just see the coffee cup lying there, you know, at the side of the road or on the beach. So I think there's a focus on the packaging, but the reality is just don't forget that the product itself, so the milk, the coffee, the carrots, the cucumbers, whatever it is, that's where the highest amount of environmental impact is. Almost always, not always, but almost always. And so this slide tells us that the packaging represents, you know, give or take 5 to 10% of the overall impact of that package plus product. And I've seen up to 20%, but the bottom line is it's low in comparison to the product. So just don't forget the product. It's important to ask questions about its sustainability and its impact, certainly as much, if not more, than the questions we ask of the packaging. And further to that, I just want a couple of other points, which I think sometimes, well, I know people aren't always aware of. And so what this image is telling us, and I'll just say this is from folks I know well out of the Department of Oregon, their Department of Environmental Quality, and people look to them from all over the world for good quality information and research. And they've done a ton of research on packaging in particular. And what this tells us is, when you look at the life cycle of something, so it could be a package, a yogurt container, whatever package you want to choose, or the product. So it could also be the yogurt. But we're going to talk about packaging. So the highest impacts by far are at these early stages. So where the red arrows point. So it's the material extraction. So the oil out of the ground, if we're talking about a yogurt tub, and then the manufacturing. So making the yogurt tub. Much lower are the environmental impacts associated with what we, in my little world, we call end of life or disposal. Whether it's recycled, whether it's put in the garbage, whatever happens to it at end of life, there are impacts associated with that processing of the materials. But these little smoke bubbles are sort of on purpose. I mean, they represent the approximate relative impacts. So these are the hot spots. But over here on the right, what this tells us is when it says higher resonance, that simply means that the public tends to pay attention to this. Is it recyclable? Yes or no? If not, I'm frustrated, I'm upset. If it is, I'm happy, that's good. And that's really not the full story, is what I'm trying to tell you. You have to look at the sourcing and where the materials have come from. So further to my point about don't forget the product, is there are a few different things, even though I'm focused more on packaging today, there are a few things you can look for when you purchase a product. So some certifications can be helpful to help validate that your product is somewhat sustainable. So there are three different examples here. The big one here, just an example of the certification of the product itself. So in this case, it's for seafood. It could be for any number of things, but this Marine Stewardship Council certification tries to tell us that the seafood has been validated according to a whole bunch of criteria. There is also, bottom left here, certification that applies to the packaging itself. So whether it's, it could be for recycling, like it's recyclability, or the recycled content. I showed you those soft drink bottles earlier. So there could be a certification to say, yes, we've certified it. This is in fact 100% recycled content, just to give you an example. And then third example would be for the organization as a whole. And I see this more and more out there. And personally, for me, this is a real marker. If I see a company is a certified B Corp, there are a certain set of values that go along with that for me. It tells me that this company is serious about social and environmental responsibility. That's a personal way that I screen some of my purchases. So just give you a few different examples of the certifications that are out there. And don't get me wrong, these certification programs are not perfect. There are critiques of all of these. You can find them out there. But my belief is that some third-party oversight and eyes-on systems is better than none. And there will always be room for improvement. Okay, number 3 out of 5. So does circular, so I mentioned the circular economy, how does this connect with the idea of sustainability? Like, do they always, are they equal? Is there slippage here? And so let me explain. So I'll answer this with an example of a major growth area in packaging, which is called flexible plastic packaging. And I'd be really hard pressed to believe that if you went into your pantry or into your fridge or freezer, that you don't have some of this, whether it's frozen blueberries, pet food. I mean, the list goes on and on and on now as to what one can purchase in a stand-up pouch or flexible plastic packaging. And I can tell you from the people who are in this business, they are doing extremely well because their business has been growing exponentially in the last 10 to 15 years, and that there's no sign that is ending anytime soon. The problem, of course, is that a high percentage of this stuff is unrecyclable, so it's garbage. Now, in Canada, typically this is straight to landfill, and the reason for that is much of it is made up of multiple layers of different materials, all to provide shelf life and freshness and to protect the product, which are all good things. I mean, that's good. That's what the packaging needs to do. It needs to be effective. But unfortunately, when you laminate all those things together, all those different materials, it makes it very difficult to get any value out of them, to recycle them. And so, but here's the but. Here's the conundrum. So while most flexible plastic packaging is not recyclable, which most of us would consider that's not good. But so here's some more information from our friends in Oregon, from the Department of Environmental Quality. So I'll explain what's going on here. So for the same amount of coffee, you have 3 different formats. You got a steel can, a rigid plastic container, And then this little box has flexible pouches of the coffee. And so really quickly, this column, oh, sorry about that. My fault. This second column tells us that in general, the steel can is recyclable. I think most of us in most jurisdictions, you can put that in the blue bin. In most jurisdictions, you can put a plastic container in the blue bin. And in most cases, you cannot recycle the flexible pouch. They did a life cycle assessment, which is a very detailed, rigorous way of assessing different environmental impact categories. Things like the energy we used, the amount of emissions, the carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere, municipal solid waste. There are others, but these are three of the big ones. And I think it's pretty evident that we see that the flexible pouch, the numbers are not only smaller, but much smaller in all three categories. And in fact, I can tell you that they're much smaller in all impact categories. And so what this tells us, and the reason the numbers are what we see, is because flexible plastics provide huge opportunities for material reduction. If we go back to our old reduce, reuse, recycle, that hierarchy that's been around for years, reduction is high in the hierarchy for a good reason. And when we reduce the materials we use, it also reduces important environmental impacts. And so it's a conundrum. You put this in the garbage, but it actually has a much lower overall environmental impact than other formats that we would think of as more sustainable because they're recyclable. And I want to challenge you to think that there is not an equal sign between recyclability and sustainability, and correspondingly between sustainability and circularity. Now, having said that, something that LC, life cycle assessments don't take into consideration is litter. You know, back to that great shoreline cleanup, that is something they don't take into consideration, and that is something that is important. That is, and then I'll give you some examples of reuse, which do address some of those issues. So I think the public perception today, we saw that in that earlier slide where people tend to focus their attention. We see a lot of, break free from plastics. It's plastics or bust. We've got to cut our addiction to plastics. And what I would argue is it's time to cut our addiction to single-use packaging in general, whatever material it's made of, including plastics. But if a situation requires single use, then we try to identify the option that overall gives us the lowest negative environmental impacts. And in this case, it would be very difficult to argue against the flexible plastic pouch. So, number 4, biodegradable and compostable sound good, but. So what's the but? So a second conundrum is in another rapidly growing area. So first rapidly growing area, the flexible plastic packaging we were just looking at. Another one is in this space of biodegradable, compostable packaging. I can tell you it's growing leaps and bounds. The marketers have a field day with it because it feels good, right? Oh, it's green. It just sort of has an intuitive feel about it. And the world, we call it the world of bioplastics. And believe me, it's like quicksand. It is surprisingly complicated. And I could literally we could spend our entire session just on this. We don't have time for that. So I'll zero in on one important reality, which is that any packaging that behaves like plastic, even if it's certified compostable, is virtually always screened out in the waste management system as contamination. So the compostable coffee cups that you see at hipster coffee shops around town, even if they go in the green bin, they will end up in landfill. And so I've been to the sites in Toronto where they deal with all of the green bin material. I've seen the whole I know the people very well who run the system. And you may well have seen this in your waste management calendar. This is ours from this year. You know, the city does not accept compostable plastic packaging, period. So it will end up in landfill. And that in and of itself is kind of a whole nother rabbit hole. Somehow people believe that, oh, well, it's okay if it ends up in landfill, that's fine. But in fact, organic matter in landfill is bad. That's why we want all our food waste, banana peels, you know, et cetera, to go in the green bin so that it's managed that way. Organic material in landfill is typically not good. Much of it turns into methane, which is a lot stronger than carbon dioxide. So it's not a good solution. So if you hear people telling you that, oh, it's okay, even if it ends up in landfill, it's fine, it really is not a preferred solution at all. So I do believe there are possibilities for certified compostable products somewhere down the line, targeted applications, for example, in sports stadiums, where it's a controlled environment where it can all be collected and then potentially managed. But there are a lot of problems with the processing of these materials, which for me right now make it definitely not a preferred solution. So the last fifth and final one for you is around food waste prevention. So I alluded to it just now in the brief conversation about compostables, but food waste that goes in the garbage rather than your green bin and ends up in landfill is, as I said, is really bad. So it ends up producing methane, which we don't want. That's the bottom line. So the National Zero Waste Council, based here in Canada, and we do a lot of work with them through PAC, reports that Canada's it's about 2 million tons of avoidable food waste every year. So I'm not talking about banana peels. I'm talking about food that otherwise could have been consumed and was wasted, is equivalent to about 2 million cars, like fossil fuel burning cars, not Teslas, on the road every year. So these are big numbers. It's big impact. And so many globally respected organizations, including the National Zero Waste Council and the World Resources Institute, say that packaging really does play a key role in preventing this type of food loss and waste. And this is another sort of point of contention for some folks. It took me a while to wrap my head around it too, so believe me. But here are some of the numbers. And you know, I've looked at a lot of data on this, and to me, it's credible data. So from zucchini to swordfish and anything in between, typically speaking, when we use some form of packaging, it doesn't have to be plastic packaging. This happens to be focused on flexible plastic packaging, but you have real gains in shelf life and the ability to preserve and extend the life of that food, and therefore reduce the likelihood that it will be wasted. So certainly there are better ways and more sustainable ways that we can introduce that packaging, you know, into the economy. But to me, the key learning, the key takeaway is that it really does play a role. And so the idea of, oh, we've just got to rush to this idea of like the utopia would be there is no packaging is really, to me, misguided. In some cases, that's fantastic. If you can go to the local farmer's market and get the cucumber, you know, straight from the field, absolutely. But we have to face the fact that we live in a global economy where food is traveling longer distances than that, and that in some cases packaging is required, and from a sustainability point of view, actually preferred. So what can we do? What can you do? So to sum up, just a couple of thoughts. So you may or may not be familiar with the Dasani plant bottle. So this is a bottle. I think I saw it most recently when I was checking out at Canadian Tire. It was in that long aisle that they force you to channel through with all the impulse buy. So there's a cooler, and I looked over and, oh, there's that Dasani bottle. So this is an interesting example, actually. It ties together a couple of things. So what can we do? My point here is simply to say that the best is to drink your tap water. If you have to buy a bottle of water, buy a bottle of water that has recycled content. Like I showed you those earlier examples of, Coke introducing 100% recycled content. So good research shows that introducing recycled content has a big impact on the environmental story. So that's number one. In this case, they've used bio-based materials to make the bottle. So it's something to the tune of 30% of this bottle is made from sugarcane. And then the rest is still oil-based plastics, but they've introduced recycled content. But the confusing thing is, I don't know about you, but if I looked at this and said, oh, it's a plant bottle, I might think, oh, it's compostable. So maybe I should put it in the green bin. And no, so a bio-based bottle like this is chemically and physically just like a regular plastic bottle. And so it would go in the green bin. But as far as our choices, again, just to reiterate, try to find packaging that is made with high percentages of renewable and or recycled content. So that's something we can do. And increasingly, businesses are trying to, they're including that information on the package to help us out. Just one other example of, an effort, in this case, Head and Shoulders. Here they partnered with an organization I know quite well called TerraCycle to collect beach plastic and then put it into the shampoo bottle itself. It's still single use, so it's not, they're doing something positive here to deal with the ocean plastics pollution problem and then offer us a product with some recycled content in it. Another brand, you might be familiar with it. It's a cosmetics brand. There's a shop right here in Toronto down on Queen Street. It's called Lush. I see there's the name of it down at the bottom there. This is an interesting example where, so number one, this little pot of moisturizer, they call them pots, 100% polypropylene, so it's a plastic material. So it's made with 100% recycled content. And then the idea is you can bring them back to the store and then they'll collect them. And then there's a little incentive for you to do that. I think you get a discount. But then they'll take those, they collect them and then turn them into new pots, just like this. So they've got kind of a loop going where they'll, again, back to that circular economy idea. So an interesting initiative by the Lush group. One other thing that we can do that I just wanted to share with you, is reuse. I mentioned this earlier, and in fact, our family has just signed up for a program that's just recently come to Ontario. It is called Loop, and Loop is what you're looking at is a little image from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation that I mentioned earlier. And so they've just divided up different reuse models. And so an example of a return from home is this Loop model. I don't have it right beside me, but what one does is go on, it's called loopstore.ca, and it's live now. And one can go on and order different items. Some of them are groceries, some of them are, call them household care items like laundry detergent. And they will deliver them to your door in a tote, in this big tote bag, and they're in reusable containers. So the Ellen MacArthur Foundation tells us that approximately 20% of all single-use plastic packaging has the potential to be replaced by reuse models. And so this is one of them. And it's available to us right here in Ontario and particularly in Toronto. They've partnered with Loblaw, so you'll see some President's Choice items available through that channel. So that's to me using or engaging with reuse models. It could be your local bulk store. I mean, it doesn't have to be a brand new program like Loop. It could be going to the bulk store, which are have restrictions now during COVID, but that's certainly another way to engage with a reuse model. So one other example of that, a local solution for our family is with a bulk shop nearby, where we've bought these reusable solutions for, on the left, laundry, and on the right, dish soap. And so it's 10 liters. And so their argument, their being the unscented company, is that this takes approximately 13 smaller plastic containers out of circulation by using this corrugated box. And then there is a plastic insert, but overall, that's their, their research says this. And to me, it seems, it seems legit. It seems like a credible argument. So this is a bit about Loop. I wanted to show these slides because I was talking to JJ about this just before I started, and I'm just about to close here. But we were talking about, when did all this kind of disposable plastic packaging really start coming into our lives? And it's certainly true. We saw that in that mountain, that National Geographic plastic mountain, that post-World War II, and this is a cover of Time magazine from the 50s, I believe it was Time magazine, celebrating one and done. If it's disposable, it just makes my life easy. It's cheap, it's convenient, and this is the way to go. So Loop, I think, in rather a clever way, says, hang on, folks. We want to move from this culture of new, convenience is king, to actually go back and look at some of the wisdom from the past. And so they've used the milkman as their, one of the images they use to conjure up the idea that, wait a second, maybe there's another way we can look at this. And so, and hence the idea of the reuse model, and the idea of actually looking at the packaging not as, the cheaper the better, but actually as an asset, something that's durable, that can be reused, and it becomes an asset to the brand owner, where it's an opportunity to engage with the customer. And really simple, but this is their economic argument. So there is an environmental argument, but there's also an economic argument. And on the left, we have it just happens to be a deodorant container. You could insert whatever you want, your shampoo bottle, your yogurt container, whatever you wish. But when it's single use, every time the manufacturer, the brand, has to spend 10 cents on the packaging. But they don't really want it. They want you and I to deal with it, whether it goes in the garbage or the recycling bin. The reuse model says no. Up front, the environmental and economic cost of the packaging will be higher. It'll be much higher. But when it's amortized over time and over use, ultimately, both from a cost point of view, financial cost point of view, and an environmental point of view, we hit a break even, and then we hit a winning point of the equation. So I won't dwell. I will tell you, our son was delighted when one of the first items I ordered through Loop was ice cream. So that made it a winner right away. There you go. That's him. That's the tote, and that's him pulling the ice cream out. And we got some other things as well. And that's what the tote looks like that it gets delivered to the door in. They don't have it in store right now, so you can't go to Loblaw and choose these items on the shelf, but that is definitely where they want to go with the solution. So I'm gonna not go into a ton more detail on Loop. I will say there are other reuse options that are coming. Tim Hortons recently announced that in the GTA, in the Greater Toronto Area, they will be piloting reuse options later this year, I think, is the target. And it's not only in the food space, you also see it in, in motor oil, for example. There are a lot of different product areas where you see reusable options being introduced into the market. Here's another one. This is from the States, but for your eggs. And right here in Toronto, I was just chatting with this woman who started this business for takeout. So if you want to order, as you know, in COVID, so many restaurants have gone to takeout. It's the only way they can survive. And so this very entrepreneurial woman here in Toronto has started the business called Supply. And so what that does is you can opt to get your takeout in reusable containers. And so she manages all the logistics associated with getting you your meal, picking that up, cleaning it, as you see here. There's the flow. So in sum, folks, I've introduced the idea of the circular economy. Maybe it was familiar to you already, but if not, the idea is moving from take, make, dispose to keeping materials in circulation at their highest and best value. I offered you some thoughts on the source of plastic pollution. You know, where is a lot of it, you know, coming from? You know, what role it plays in the overall amount of plastic that's out there at all. Things like that. I urge you not to forget the product. So, you know, don't forget the coffee when you're holding the empty coffee bag in your hand and feeling frustrated because it goes in the garbage. It was the coffee example that I gave you, that life cycle assessment, to say that, you know what, circular is important, but it isn't always the whole story when we think of sustainability. So recyclability does not equal sustainability. Compostability and biodegradability sound good, but there are a lot of things need to get sorted out there before it's really a viable solution. Packaging really does play a role in food waste prevention, and that has correspondingly very important and big environmental gains for us when we prevent that food waste, and when we do have to put food in the organics program, that it goes in the green bin and is managed accordingly. And then important when you're out there in the world, if you look for, if it is single use, well, and even with reuse, look for packaging that has recycled content as high as possible, and or renewable content. Those are, generally speaking, those are good things. And as I close with the idea that, I mean, this is much my view, but I think really the time is now for reuse options and models to be more a part of our lives, perhaps like they were, you know, 50, 60 plus years ago. There needs to be a revitalization of that kind of thinking. So that's it from me. I hope that's given you a little bit of food for thought. And now the floor is wide open for questions and comments. And I think I'll go off stop share so we get a little more, you can see me a bit better. There we go.
I think we'll probably have 1,000 questions. I mean, I mildly exaggerate, but I think to try to help monitor this, Susan, if you can keep an eye on the chat, and
Okay.
then Marianne, you're still there too. So, because two sets of one pair of eyes can only follow so many people. So, what I'm going to suggest is, because the good thing is we have 15 people. I'm just going to go down the list, and that way we won't miss anybody. Because otherwise, if we start doing in the Zoom room, it's hard to see hands because there's all these little Hollywood square things. So let's go down the list. I see at the top Debbie Van Beek, and I'm sure Debbie, you have a million questions. So Debbie, did you turn on your microphone?
Did well.
Do you have a question? You don't have to have a question. Do you have a question?
Did you see that? Did you see how I held up my hand?
Good.
Yeah, nice.
Like this.
Good.
Okay, so well, I am from the flexible packaging industry.
Hey, excellent. Good. Yeah, we work with tons of flex pack manufacturers.
Yes, and my employment was recently terminated. So
Good.
I can talk freely, but I will not be able to post anything on Facebook.
Okay.
Yeah, fair enough.
That's part of my termination agreement.
So what question do you have, Debbie, today?
Well, okay, I have the same question as Wendy, which is about apartment buildings not being able to compost.
So what do you do? That's a good one. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of us have.
You
People
know,
have.
I mean, they tried to have a green bin and our building really did use it, but the rats became to be too bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what do you
So
suggest for apartment use? Just the compactor?
yeah. So sorry, when you say the compactor, what are you thinking there?
Well, you put it into a plastic bag and then you put it down the garbage chute
Oh,
and it goes through the compactor.
so into the garbage. Yeah. No, honestly, it's I mean, I deal with this with my mom, who effectively lives in an apartment building, and I see how it works there, and well, it doesn't work. So I know that the city of Toronto has made efforts over the years to, as you said, pilot in some cases programs in apartment buildings, and I'm not intimately familiar with where their efforts are at, but I have heard of the exact problems you describe. Like they're just on the ground problems where, you know, it's well intended, but then there are practical problems of things like rats, you know, that make it, well, this, you know, this doesn't work. So I'm afraid I don't have, there isn't I don't have the magic solution there, other than, you know, somebody who's incredibly dedicated to the cause might try to figure out some kind of, you know, an apartment composting, like vermicomposting. Like I know people who've done that in apartment buildings. You can get worms. When I say vermicomposting, you can get like an under the counter composting unit. So you may look at me and think, Andrew, you're crazy, but people do that.
I wonder,
Absolutely.
would there be something available for a balcony? Maybe that's the
Well, I'm not, I actually, my wife and I did this. It's got to be 20 years ago. So, but we kept it inside. So temperature is obviously a key issue, or else the worms die.
Right.
So I can't start going into that. You'd have to look into that further. But that's sort of the do it yourself. You become the system. And other than that, it would be, you know, or do you happen to know somebody nearby, like you know, somebody who's living in a house who has access to the green bin, who you can say, hey, look, once a week, can I put my stuff in your bin? But I'm talking about real workaround solutions. I think that it's an unfortunate reality of the apartment, you know, of the fit between organics and apartment buildings that still hasn't been figured out.
So we
So
can put it out there on Facebook.
Oh,
Sometimes that's helpful. So just
yeah.
because we have time, and next person, Ayla, do you have a question?
No, no, but I found it very interesting. Thank you very much.
Good. Okay. Susan
good.
Johnson, do you have a question?
I just want to point out, I belong to a local Facebook group, and there's one woman who's collecting egg cartons, including the plastic one, for a friend of hers who's an egg farmer, needs those. Another one's collecting prescription pill bottles.
Right.
So there are, you know, alternatives outside of the city's recycling, and it's, I think, a question is looking for some of those.
You know,
Yeah, good
one
point.
thing that I've found is bread bags.
Yeah.
They're amazing when you save them and reuse them to put vegetables in.
Yeah.
You know what I
So
mean? Like when you wash your lettuce and then just put it into a bread bag. It's amazing. The lettuce stays so fresh.
so I see Marianne has a
So
question. Marianne, do you want to unmute yourself and put on your video? All right.
Andrew, I'm curious. We met a while ago, so we had a pretty strong showing at our church for our green team, and then COVID came, and then it's all sort of, we're trying to ramp up again. But one of the things that we had talked about was following what St. Clair is doing. I think it's called St. Clair Reduces, something along that line. And we're very close to Mount Pleasant, and so my dream would be that we could have a Mount Pleasant Reduces, just along what you're saying about having packaging that can be reused for takeout. I guess the problem is, especially now because Kevin Manager has stepped down as the BIA person lead, I wonder how likely that is for us as this little church to push forward. I'm wondering if you know anything about that.
No, I mean, I can think about it a little more offline, and then you and I can, I'm happy to chat further about it. I mean, I think like anything, it requires a champion, you know, somebody who's willing to drive it. And then inevitably, maybe like Susan's finding, like you find people who are, you know, willing to respond and chip in. But and then the question is, well, what champion what? You know, what are the most
It could be a social enterprise. Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, I'm not sure I can say anything particularly insightful right away. But again, if you whatever, if you jot down a little bit more about what you're thinking, you want to chat a bit more afterwards, I'm happy to kick around some ideas, because sometimes those things just take a little bit of that, you know, kicking it around, which maybe, you know, we don't want to do here with other people who want to throw some questions at me, but I'm happy to do that.
And just another quick thing, there's an organization called Earth Hub, and so there's a woman. I actually went through the website to find a woman that lives 2 doors down from us, who collects things that don't go in landfill. So for example, like pill bottles that when you get a prescription.
Oh yeah.
So that's another avenue. I'm hoping that our church becomes a bit of a hub for. We've already started collecting things. It's just a matter of finding where those things can go. Like the woman down the street collects all the egg cartons or takeout containers. It's amazing what people are doing. We just need to be able to reach out. So John Joseph, that's our next collection.
I love it. Okay.
Yeah, some networking around it.
And I see Carol in, is it Duns Cannon? Duns Canson.
It's Duncanson, actually.
Duncanson, sorry.
No problem. I have a whole bunch of things I've been sort of, so some of them are comments. First of all, and it's going to be randomly, I used to, with my husband, own a green store back in the 90s, and we sold vermicomposters to a lot of apartment dwellers. So absolutely, that is one way to go. And they are still available, but not actually as much promoted as they were 20, 30 years ago. But they are still around. You can just Google it. So, and a couple of bulk stores, some of them will let you still bring your own packaging. We have one on the Danforth that I go to, or my husband goes to a couple of times a week, and we take our own packaging and we fill everything up and we weigh it and bring it home, and we bring out no extra packaging whatsoever. So that you just have to ask. I think the bulk barns maybe won't, but some of those smaller independent ones will. So it's worth asking. I have a question about the stand-up pouches, because they've been one of my bugaboos for a while. The old frozen vegetables that used to be in, like, say, cranberries, because that's something I actually was really looking for. In the clear plastic film is what they used to be in the freezers, and they were just sort of stacked on top of each other. And now you've got these, you know, stand-up pouches. So what, I mean, in terms of, I mean, it's not just a question of stand-up pouches versus these other heavier types of packaging, which would be more environmentally impactful. There are some situations where, and certainly frozen vegetables and fruit would be among them, where it can still be the old type of plastic film, that's sort of clear see-through plastic film that's just as lighter in fact than the stand-up. It's just that they don't look as pretty. It's all a marketing thing. So there's no, I mean, as far as environmental impact, that stuff is actually, you know, recyclable, but it's less weight than the stand-up pouches and less different layers and all that. So is there anything that you have heard of people kind of putting pressure on the Loblaws of the world to kind of go backwards a little bit in that particular instance?
Debbie probably knows, well, I'm sure knows way more about this than I do, but my short answer would be no. I don't think that's on their radar at all. Debbie, would you,
Well,
is it Debbie?
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Okay,
Yeah,
so probably, unless you're reusing that we'll say cranberry bag, in the thick, heavy polyethylene that just lays flat on the shelf. In the stand-up pouches, there's actually less plastic used, because they use different types of film, and it's a laminated product.
Mm.
And they can down gauge, which means the thickness of the package can be much thinner. Now, depending on the product, then depends on the type of main film layer that you would use, like a nylon as opposed to a polyester, as opposed to just a polyethylene.
Right.
Like for example, nylon would give you a good puncture resistance at a 48 gauge for coffee beans and coffee grounds, or ground coffee, where it has a good tear strength and a good oxygen barrier. And as I said, you only use 48 gauge to maybe a 1 mil polyethylene as the sealant layer. So, I mean, it's one evil versus the next.
I guess
evil.
what I found with the old cranberry bags is I actually did find them at the veggie store, or, on the Danforth. And it's actually very, very thin. It's the old, like the old ocean spray ones that used to be just in a, like they were like this and they're clear plastic. Anyway, it was just something that I noticed, and they can be so-called recycled, whereas the others can't.
If you buy them fresh instead of frozen, they are in a thinner polyethylene bag, and usually they have it's perforated.
But those can also and that was exactly that kind that used to be found, that kind of packaging that used to be found in the freezers as well in the big stores. Anyway, I don't want to take any more time about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an interesting thought.
Oh, that's a very good
Carolyn?
question.
Yes.
Yeah, Carolyn. But I would say in general, it's, as Debbie was saying, it's really all film. And at the end of the day, there will be some differences in the weight and so forth. But one innovation that is like emerging now into the marketplace, it has issues because it's expensive and sometimes to do with performance, it can be challenging, but it's mono-material flexible packaging. So those same stand-up pouches, but just using, it's still lots of layers, but it's using one type of plastic, like polyethylene, say.
Right.
And so then the reason they're doing that is so that the recyclability of those types can so that they can be recycled. So the recycling rates remain low, but there are a number of initiatives across Canada to improve those rates. So there's a lot of work being done to try to better incorporate those types of materials into our recovery systems.
And what do you think of do you know anything about what Jason Kinney is trying to implement in Alberta?
Oh yeah,
with
I saw that in the chat.
They would be in a good position because they're from petroleum. You know what I mean? They have oil and tar sand. So would they not be in a position to be able to recycle plastics, seeing that they're made of petroleum anyway? Like this is sort of my thinking anyway, because they have a lot of technology for oil sands, so they must have the technology to break down the petroleum.
Yeah, for sure they do. I'll be very straight with you though. In terms of, I'm much more familiar with Ontario. I try to pay attention to other places in Canada as well, including Alberta. But I saw maybe 6 weeks ago, or it might have even been before the holidays, an announcement from the province around their commitment to invest in recycling infrastructure. But I'm afraid I couldn't be any more, I couldn't give you a cogent critique of their plans. I'm just not that deep into it. But there is movement. There's movement everywhere in Canada. But so good question. I can't give you any more detail on that. Carolyn, I know you had.
I had just a couple more, and I'm really sorry. I don't want to take up too much time, but I had so one thing about your the company that you talked about in Toronto, the supply. There actually are about 4, I think, companies that are working on reusing takeout containers and that kind of thing. So you can just Google them, the ones that are available. In terms of the Mount Pleasant reduces sort of thing, There is a Danforth reduces, Roncy reduces is what started the whole thing. There's a Beach reduces, there are all kinds of them. And the problem right now is that it's hard to get restaurants and cafes and coffee shops or whatever signed up because of the restrictions of COVID. They're just a little concerned about how it's all going to work. And also sometimes you can't even access them if they're not restaurants so you might want to wait a little bit, but you could try. I mean, certainly there's a lot of information out there, but Roncy Reduces is the one that's been going on the longest. So that would be a really good place to start getting some information. I was sort of involved in the Danforth Reduces one, and it's basically been on hold the last little while. So just one other thing. Is it one other thing? Oh, for the apartment composting, I would actually also contact the City of Toronto Waste people, because they might have some advice and solutions. And I know that I think they pretty much mandated it for any new apartment buildings, but for old ones and retrofits that have started and then had all these problems, they might have some other suggestions. And I know that there's a program sort of for people to be leads in apartment buildings of all green issues and recycling issues. And there's a whole program about that. So you could look in either at Live Green of the City of Toronto or just City of Toronto Waste and try to contact somebody there. And the only other question I had, and sorry about all this, but you know, the new calendar that came out with City of Toronto, which showed all that so-called compostable stuff that you're not supposed to put in the green bin. And the reason being that about 5% is plastic. Are there any, do you know whether there's some of those those so-called compost, I know about the cups is a total sham. I mean, greenwashing from a number of years ago, but the packaging that is sort of the compostable, looks like cardboard stuff. Are there some that are just cardboard? Because I know that a whole bunch of takeout places have been encouraged to get away from the styrofoam, and they're thinking, oh, this is great, I've gone into this new you know, better way that people can put in their green bins. And I'm wondering whether there are some that have plastic but some others that don't, and how the waste people would tell the difference if they do. I mean, is the RIP test, is anything, I mean, I feel badly for these people who have switched over only to find that maybe it's not a decent solution.
Yeah, so these are emerging solutions in the marketplace. So there's still a lot of learning going on. Here's what I know. I would say that no, you can imagine once it goes into the green bin, I mean, there's just a giant tipping floor. It all just spills out. So there's no method of ability to test it once it's in the system. It's just, so it'll if it's a fiber, it's called fiber. If it's a fiber product with some kind of coating, plastic coating, I would imagine, I'd have to double check that, but I would imagine it would get screened out with the other plastic packaging. That would be my guess. So that's one thing. The second thing I've learned is that a colleague I work with at PAC, I mean, he's deep into the waste management space. And he's saying that, so he works with a lot of the mills. So if it goes in the recycling stream, so it's takeout packaging, it's fiber, it's got some kind of coating, that's causing real problems for the mills. Right now, they can't effectively separate it and deal with it. So it's headache city. So I think the storyline right now is that this kind of knee-jerk reaction to go away from plastic takeout packaging and this rush to fill the void, which as we know may later in Canada be regulated later this year, the alternatives aren't necessarily better, which is what I'm trying to signal. So, you know, there's some plastic materials that are like polystyrene is incredibly efficient in terms of its material use, and it's actually very recyclable and so on. So anyway, it's an emerging situation. There may be, I don't want to just dismiss it, because I think there may be solutions that are viable from a end of life perspective. But right now, I'd say in a lot of cases, they're creating as many problems as they're trying to solve.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Okay, I'm done.
So Chris, if you think of the balance between okay, because one type of recycling we haven't even talked about is something that our grandparents did. You know, you reuse the plastic containers again and again, and you also reuse the glass containers again and again. Now, and there's also the idea that remember several decades ago, because there was such a push on green, it became trendy to be green, right? And then it became maybe less trendy. So do you think we should maybe in the meantime try to recycle at home as much as possible, and then maybe try to, because it sounds like it's a multivalent approach, also to maybe promote some social enterprise that can actually do this versus waiting for Godot and the big conglomerate decide that it's economically viable to do this. What's your thought?
Was this for me, JJ?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Sorry, I
Yes,
called you Chris. I mean Andrew. Sorry.
that's okay. That's a compliment. That's a compliment. So
Yeah.
I would say absolutely there's power in the people. I mean, I agree. We can't sit around waiting for the magic, because there's no magic solution for any of this. So I think all of the initiatives that have been mentioned, whether it's collecting the egg cartons or the pill bottles or the Danforth reduces, these neighborhood initiatives are at grassroots. Those efforts are very important. And so you mentioned though the reuse type of solution. I think even within that, and I think, as you know, I believe that it's time that we need to introduce reuse business models, some of which are more, I mean, I call them third party. So they're like that Loop example I gave, like it's a business itself that's set up to deliver the reuse service, really.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think the example of going to the local bulk shop, we have the exact same situation here down on Queen Street with your own containers. I mean, you don't have to wait for a Loop and go through all that. I absolutely think we as citizens need to say, okay, I'm just going to find my own container. Debbie brought this up, use the bread bags and put the lettuce in it. We do the same thing. So I really believe those are equally important, but that also we need to be, systemic change is important too. I don't think we can disregard the idea that, I know the guy very well at Tim Hortons, the director of sustainability, and this is not, a half-assed or effort to think about sustainability. They are focused on trying to make real change. And so I do think we as citizens, we also need to ask for that and say, hey, if we go to Tim Hortons for our coffee, you're not going to tell the person there, but write to them and say, we want that reuse system. It's important. And so keep going. When they hear from consumers, it's meaningful. So I think it's both. I think there's the big picture systemic stuff like the Canada Plastics Pact and like the Canadian government and the provincial level stuff and municipal, like it all counts.
Right.
So that's what I'd say.
Can I just mention two things? Okay, number one, my grandparents, they had a small farm back in the Depression years.
Yeah.
They used to use the potato peelings and other vegetable peelings and just throw them back into the garden and created their own compost. So anybody with a vegetable garden, that's your in. Oh, now I just lost the thought of the second one. Okay, that's all right.
That's a good one.
That's a good one.
Absolutely.
And, I'm trying to think. Oh, what was it?
Talking about your grandparents.
Brainstorm, but
anyway, Debbie, that's a very like when we think of the circular economy. Sometimes it could sound, what's this kind of new approach we're talking about here? But in a lot of cases, I was speaking to some folks the other day where I was saying the circular economy can be a big new system like Loop, or it can be a tried and true system like taking the potato peelings and putting them back into the garden, or my local dry cleaner that repairs things. There's a whole right to repair movement.
The mending, yeah.
Exactly.
To me, that's so the dry cleaner doesn't have any, they're not talking about, oh, we're part of the circular economy and all this jazz. It's just, we repair stuff. We have a sewing machine
Right.
And instead of throwing out, how many times have we heard the salesperson say, you know what, it's probably cheaper just to buy a new one.
Mm-hmm.
And that drives me bananas because I
Yeah.
think, no, I want to, can I put a new zipper on it? Can I, well, you know, whatever it is. So I
Okay.
think there's a lot
Oh,
to be said for,
Here's in conjunction with the loop idea for, I guess it would be more upscale restaurants that, you know, offer in dining
yes,
that are now with takeout. In Japan, they used to go around and deliver noodles and
Right.
food in glass dishes. And then when you were finished
Right.
eating, you put your dishes back out and they'd come around and collect them. You know what I mean? For the, you
Yes.
know, for the exquisite downtown little restaurants that are there, that's something that they could do.
yes,
Deliver it in their dishes, and then you just rinse them and then put them outside your door and they come around and pick them up.
yes. And they're even in COVID, I'm going to say 2 months ago, there was an article that really mirrors what you just suggested, Debbie. It was in San Francisco, high-end restaurant, partnered with a reuse provider called Dispatch Goods. And that's sort of exactly what they're doing. So I think, you know, even in COVID, I'm seeing a lot of activity in this reuse space, a lot of pilots, a lot of emerging innovation. So I think to me,
Creative thought. Yeah.
that's a good thing.
Yeah.
JJ, did you want to jump in?
I'm good. Any other hands up? No, I think we're happening. Okay. So Andrew, I think we have a part 2, 3, and 4, and 5 coming along here. But
Oh, do we?
no, I meant not in terms of where we want to go because we're not there yet. And we had a compost heap, by the way, when I grew up. No one else in our neighborhood because we were Italian, and I thought my dad was out of his mind, but he was very forward thinking. And actually, we at our previous church, Jean Stinson, she would take the potato peels, the onion skins, and throw it in the soup pot and cook it all up, and that was your stock.
Doc.
So
Yeah.
we've lost touch with that. There's no there's no cooking soup recipe that I've ever read that will even encourage you to do that. But she actually owned a restaurant, so there's a whole thing we could do we haven't even thought about to get the use out of those things. Yeah. But
Amazing.
there you go. So how about I'll just begin to wind down, and Andrew, thank you and thank you. But Susan, do you want to say? And so thank you for coming. And if you want to get on the list, just email Marianne and let her know, and she'll put you on the subscribing list for other future things. Next week, I can't really remember what we're having, but it'll be something exciting, I'm certain, because we have lots of great things going on. And Susan, do you want to just bid everybody a farewell?
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew.
Hope you'll come again. And Andrew, I'm
So much.
sure we can get another session dealing with this. This is
Let's all do our bit in recycling, reusing, you know, just keep at it. That's all you can do for the time being.
just
I concur. Listen, thank you for inviting me. I always love talking to people about this. I'd be happy to come back whenever it makes sense. And otherwise, I said I'd send JJ the slides afterwards, so I'm happy to do that. And otherwise, all the best with the different initiatives and efforts that came up today in our conversation.
Okay.
Just want to add that next week we're having James Fitzgerald, who will talk about the third book in his trilogy, Dreaming Sally, which was about his teenage first love who died suddenly, and he's written a book about it. So please do come back.
He's a
Thank you, everybody.
fantastic
That's